Should we start?
Yes, sir, we can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, and on behalf of IUCN and IUCN Leaders for Niche program, I welcome everyone to today's webinar. The theme of today's webinar is why conservation will be fundamental to tourism-based livelihoods. As we know that tourism has one of the, you can say, very high potential area for the, you can say, livelihood support. And even in India, more than you have out of the total jobs creation, as you see, more than, you can say, 4.2 crore jobs they are created through the tourism sector. And now suddenly with the, you can say, this COVID related, you can say, challenges, somehow everything has come to the standstill, and most of these their livelihoods have also come under tremendous, you can say, challenges. And I think that now with the COVID related challenges in the tourism has to be sustainable. In what form, what new normals in the tourism activities need to be incorporated. So in this webinar series, we will be having based on the tourism theme about 6 episodes. So today is the first in that series, that is the post-COVID-19 challenges and opportunities for the ecotourism in India. And in this, we will be deliberating that how, in what way we see that in future when the things become, you can say, with the new normals, so that the tourism will also have to incorporate many things about the new normals. As one example, I was reading in the Government of India also, the Indian Tourist Development Corporation, they recently had some training workshop that now to sustain the tourism, what should be there in the, maybe in the restaurant seating arrangement, how to maintain the social distancing, how to maintain all these hygiene related things in some way or other. And when we talk of the ecotourism, somehow this is one of the, you can say, zoonotic outbreak, has some way in its origin in some of the disruption of the, you can say, our connect with the nature, disruption of the, you can say, ecosystem, you can say their habitat degradation or destruction, and it has created some type of thing. So that for all the fundamental activities, maybe the business activities, maybe the tourism related activities, for all other aspects, we have to respect the nature. Even for the tourism also, where we call what we say that ecotourism, we have to do the tourism in harmony with the nature without damaging the nature. We have to respect for the nature. So with this, I will just initiate the today's deliberations, and luckily in our today's deliberations on this webinar series, we have also our regional director from the International Union for Conservation of Nature from Asia region, regional office, Ms. Aban Kabaraji, and also Dr. T.P. Singh, also from the Asia regional office, Bangkok, deputy regional director. So I welcome them also. And now I hand over to Ms. Lima Rosalind to take the further proceedings of the today. And in the beginning, I will request that she can invite Ms. Aban for opening remarks, and followed by Dr. T.P. Singh, and then our speakers can follow.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Saxena. Welcome, everybody. May I request Ms. Aban, Regional Director, IUCN Asia Office, Bangkok, to start her, to give her opening remarks kindly, please. Ma'am?
Due to some technical issues, she is not able to join as panelist. We are trying, so maybe we can continue with the discussion, and then later on we can add her.
So let me invite Mandip Singh Soin. Mandip is a prominent Indian mountaineer, explorer, adventure travel expert, environmentalist who has founded Responsible Tourism of India to promote concern of sustainable tourism in India. In 1979, he co-founded a national and international award-winning travel company, Ibex Expeditions Private Limited. Welcome, Mandip, to this webinar. And can I have your opening remarks, please?
Well, I'm obviously delighted to engage, because this is quite a burning issue for all of us in terms of whoever straddles tourism and conservation. And of course, the vehicle is normally seen as ecotourism. So I'm glad we are having this discussion, because right at the back end, we've had a webinar yesterday on responsible tourism. And part and parcel of that is, how we conduct our tourism activities in national parks or sanctuaries or natural areas and so on. So I think it's very timely, and I'm more than happy to engage and bat for the side of tourism, knowing fully well that there are both negatives as well as positives. And I think the essence is to increase the positives and to decrease the negatives. And that's pretty much what is the global sustainable tourism criteria, which kind of rests on that one major pillar. So I hope we can have a nice and engaging discussion. And I'm glad you have a senior person from the Ministry of Environment and Forests. And thanks very much to IUCN for hosting this. Thank you.
Okay. My next guest for today is Mr. Anirban Ghosh. Anirban has been working at Mahindra and Mahindra since 1999. He currently leads the sustainability work in the Mahindra Group as Chief Sustainability Officer. Under his leadership, Mahindra has developed an award-winning sustainability framework, becoming a founding member of Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. Anirban is also very passionate about Sustainable Housing Leadership Consortium to accelerate the spread of green buildings in India. Anirban, welcome. Can I have your opening remarks, please? You're not audible.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on the webinar. It's a good time to talk about conservation and ecotourism. One of the big lessons that the lockdown and COVID has taught us is that we are definitely living beyond natural boundaries. And therefore, any activity that tends to cross natural boundaries should be relooked at. We've also learned that livelihoods are very fragile to environmental disruptions. We've experienced cyclones, hurricanes, and environmental disruptions of that kind before. We haven't experienced something of the magnitude that we are experiencing now. And we are probably learning lessons that we never knew existed. When it comes to tourism, the idea of eco with tourism is almost virtually non-existent among regular tourists. What I mean by that is every time you go to a tourist location, the moment a group of people reach there, the place never gets prettier or better. It only deteriorates. And therefore, encouraging ecotourism, not just in fragile hotspots like forests, but in almost any place, is the most responsible thing to do. So I'm quite happy to be a part of this conversation. We definitely don't want plastic packets and bottles on hillsides. We definitely don't want crowds of people going through forests trying to spot a tiger. That's probably not the right way to do it. So I'm quite happy to contribute to a conversation which, if it makes the slightest change to these regular practices of the normal Indian tourist, I would be most delighted. Thank you.
Yeah, so the next question that we would really like both Mandip and Anirban to really look at is, what are your views on nature wildlife tourism being an attraction for tourism post-COVID? You think a lot of them will head to the hills and the valleys post-COVID? What do you think?
Yes, actually, of all the webinars and the conferences and Zooms that I've been attending, both at the international and national level, I think it's quite clear that the sense seems to be that the first kind of tourism or tourist that will be off the block will be the domestic traveler. And for the domestic traveler, naturally, given the sense of the way COVID is perceived and its spread, it would be automatically going towards natural areas, away from the cities and big sort of crowds, as well as doing a certain amount of adventure activities where there is a kind of a natural, distancing, physical distancing included. I mean, already people are thinking, if you want to go on a trek where we use a two-man tent for two people, we will use a two-man tent for one person, just as a small example. And similarly, if you are going to national parks, which is likely to be the next draw, chances are all that will now happen. Therefore, it puts a greater responsibility on operators, on the traveler, and of course the park management, in working together. And I think, nothing would be better in terms of the timing of the National Ecotourism Policy, which is in the draft stage with the Ministry of Environment and Forests, the CII, the Responsible Tourism Society, the organization called TOFT. We've all worked together to try and engage with them. And actually, the great thing is it appears that they might make ecotourism as a forest activity, as a allowed forest activity, in which comes a plethora of things, whether it's wildlife viewing on the core areas, or not necessarily on the core only, but the buffer, the natural landscapes. And like Anirban said, we need to have tourists going and being responsible in any spot, be it urban or natural, and more so natural. So the great I guess music to our ears is that yesterday when we engaged with the Ministry of Tourism, they have agreed with our society to launch a nationwide program called How to Be a Responsible Traveler. So we are going to take our guidelines, and these guidelines, obviously, we'll have to figure out how we make compliance and so on, but it's a great start, because intrinsically we all believe that most people would like to be responsible. That's the premise we would like to work on. And if we give this awareness, if we get the industry sensitized and work in partnership, maybe we can crack it.
Anirban?
Yep.
We've never had a chance to reorient a complete ecosystem. We've done little of this and a little of that, and an improvement here and an improvement there. But thanks to COVID, suddenly we've got a chance to begin from scratch in many areas. Let's say we're talking about the Kanha National Reserve Forest. There's nothing to stop us from asking the question, are we happy with the way we run tourism in this area? And if we are not, then what is it that we would like to change? And if we are clear about the changes we want to bring about, when the restart happens, could we restart in a way which is far more responsible than we've ever been before? Yes, there will be pulls and pressures from, say, the hotels that have come up around Kanha in terms of the number of people they will want to let in. But I'm sure with some reasonable conversations, we can arrive at, okay, here is the number of people who should be allowed into this area at any given time. Just like it is done with the forests themselves. Because if we run into trouble every time there are too many people that the ecosystem, the capacity can hold. And then we really don't have much of a chance to be, to be eco in our tourism or to be responsible in the way we live lives. So I do think it has given us an opportunity. We may not be able to do it everywhere, but even if we are able to do it at critical spots, at places we really treasure, then it would be a step forward.
Mr. Saxena, you like to comment here?
Yeah, I think as Mandip and Mr. Ghosh rightly told, that this also gives us an opportunity to have a relook what way we want to see our future tourism. The fundamental thing for any tourism policy, or you can say that any tourism related strategy or framework, should be that our activity should have, tourism activity should have, you can say minimum, you can say sort of a footprint in terms of we should ensure that our nature remains protected, our air does not get much polluted, we get the fresh air, our rivers remain clean, we get the pure drinking water. So these should be the fundamental aspects while devising any sort of, you can say, tourism activities, the regulating of the tourism activities. Some of the recent initiatives which we are now listening under the new normals to attract the tourism, just like in Tadoba National, you can say the live sort of a safari has been initiated. And similarly, in the Chennai also zoo, you have you can say the live sighting. Similarly, the Patna Zoo, they have also come out some sort of a video series in which you can visit the zoo live and you can see the animals. So these are some sort of a new, you can say, the educative value, but the real tourism is when you actually go and feel the nature. That the feel of the nature is fundamental for any tourism activity, and especially now we have the stalwarts like Mr. Mandip for the responsible tourism and Mr. Ghosh from the Mahindras, who have series of, you can say, their properties in the, you can say, near to the nature, and they have certainly lot of pressure when the people come. So how to, you can say, make the tourist also responsible? We talk of the responsible tourism, but the responsible tourist, right beginning from the starting from the, you can say, the destination place at the arrival, when they board the, you can say, bus or maybe the taxi, and up to the destination places, you have to regulate that at a particular place you have minimum number of those people can only be allowed. It should not be just in the name of the business if you get large number of bookings. So no need to congest too much. So at the same time, you have to sustain your business also, so that whatever is your it has to be sustainable. So it needs to be, because if we look at the sustainability of the tourism, so that it can be sustainable in the long run. And if we look into aspects of the short-term profits, that if today we have a large number of pressure and we want to make all the profit, but in future if we degrade the nature, so such type of you can say threat will always remain. So it is really an initiation of very good discussion. And Miss Lima, I think Miss Aban might have joined. If you can just check.
Yeah, I'll invite. Yeah, Miss Aban, good afternoon. Welcome to the first Leader for Nature webinar. Miss Aban is the Regional Director, IUCN Asia Office in Bangkok. Miss Aban, your opening remarks, please, for us.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the panel, and thank you for joining us. This is a real pleasure, and I hope one of many seminars, webinars in this style. I think my only opening remarks would be related to the importance of trying to find this new normal that everybody talks about in the context of conservation and business as we move forward. I mean, tourism is very much a part of business activities, whether government or private sector. And it's something which at its heart is really all about the environment that tourists go to, that tourists want to visit, whether it's cultural, whether it's natural. And so the earlier remarks that were made about the need to make sure that this environment is in some way conserved, protected, looked after is extremely important. And some of the things that we're already beginning to see, all of you will have seen the fact that when you take human pressure off natural sites, how the animals come back, how the plants come back, how the air becomes cleaner. And I think one of the challenges that we need to look at in the post-COVID is, what is the new normal? Can we try and maintain the advantages that we've seen of the lack of human pressure on some of our precious places and some of our best sites? And can we perhaps ensure that we can still enjoy them as very important tourist sites, but ensure that their integrity is maintained and preserved? Just one example that we speak to you from Thailand, and as a policy initiative post-COVID, they've decided that all national parks in rotation will be closed for 2 months every year in order to give them a respite from the kind of pressure that human beings and tourism brings. But then at the same time, how do they ensure that the economy of those parks is also maintained? the people don't suffer. The people who, conservation doesn't suffer because there's no income coming in to actually ensure that conservation is funded. Those are the kinds of things that I think we'd really like to hear from you. And I'll stop there and I look forward to listening.
Thank you so much, Aban. And Mandip, over to you. I want to ask you this particular question, which says, will increase in domestic tourism or domestic travel pose new threats to the limited resources of these fragile ecosystems, like your mountains and your valleys, and considering that? So how do you want to deal with it? What are your opinions?
No, that's a great question, because again, what's been happening within the industry, as you can imagine, tourism has come to a dead standstill. And if tourism is going to rise again from the domestic traveler, there are two segments. One is the domestic traveler that was always there in India, and the second lot is the Indian traveler that used to travel abroad. So within the industry circle, the idea is to try and get those people, is a market segment, to come into travel within India. Now that number is about 15 to 18 million. And so you can imagine that if we were to even convert half of them to travel within India, the pressures will be enormous. So
Yeah.
although we all want the business, but we have to do it really responsibly, and that's where it comes down to our feeling very pleased right now that the Ministry of Tourism is going to back us up with this national campaign for the responsible traveler. And we are even thinking of developing an app which will basically be downloaded on your phone, which gives you the guidelines of what it means to be a responsible traveler. And within the app, maybe we will have service providers like tour operators, hotels, lodges, who are members of our society or have pledged to do a particular environmental code and make it known to their customers so that the customer can be the policeman. So there are lots of ideas which we are now literally, they are on the anvil, and we hope like hell that we can actually implement these very quickly. Otherwise, obviously, it's a no-brainer that a lot of places will get pressure. Now, at the same time, the other strategy is that we've asked the state governments as well as the center that we must be allowed to carry out carrying capacity studies immediately. And I'm not talking of just national parks, because national parks have a pretty good handle on their numbers by and large.
Yeah.
But all the others, like and valleys and beautiful natural spots, a lot what Anirban was talking about, we want to make sure that actually the fear of the industry is that they think that when you talk carrying capacity, it is actually, trying to
limit the numbers.
That's not true. It is only that it goes in crazy spikes when there's no, controlled sort of a tourism. We all know that. So we are trying to sensitize our tourism industry. We're trying to get some minor amount of regulation and sensitization. And I think, honestly, like we've all said, the moment is right. I think a lot of good travelers, a lot of sensitive people are not wanting to create a heavy footprint anymore. They see what we have done to nature. And even at a, philosophical level, I think the sense is that they all want to do journeys which have a lighter footprint. So, one hopes with all these things coming together, we can win.
That's very hopeful. Anirban, your thoughts?
Lamar, Mandip still looks very young, but I got on in time. The first time I went to a hill station was more than 45 years ago. And in this period, I would have been to at least 10 hill stations multiple times. I cannot honestly say that any one of them has become better than what it was when I saw it the first time. Now, population has already increased. Pressures of tourism have gone up. even if the 15 million that Mandip referred to don't go to the hill stations, we still have a very large number going. But given this break, we've got to figure out a way that when people return, what are the few things that we must do differently? I think it will be impossible to tell people that you can't go to these places anymore. Like Mandip saying, the idea is not to limit people, but the idea is, what do you do? Or how do you behave when you reach a certain place so that the place continues to remain beautiful over time? The same tourist goes to a Darjeeling or a Shimla or a Naldera or any one of the lovely hill stations of India, has a certain kind of reaction, and then goes to Switzerland and says, oh, this is so beautiful. And oh, this is so beautiful in places where there are people. When you go to our hill stations and say, oh, this is so beautiful, it's when you're looking at places where there are no people. And that's where the big difference lies. That how is it possible to keep our tourist places beautiful even when people go there? I don't know if it's asking for too much, but then these are the sorts of dichotomies that sustainability or ecotourism deals with anyway. Otherwise, we will not have a harmony between people, planet, and profit.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Anirban. Deep, coming to you.
Ms. Lima,
yeah, Mr. Saxena, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Very rightly summarize these things, and these are very relevant things. So meanwhile, I would also like to welcome Dr. T.P. Singh. He is our regional director, IUCN Asia Regional Office, Bangkok. Dr. T.P. Singh is also an Indian Forest Service officer and has vast experience of working in the mountains. He was in Indian Forest Service in Uttarakhand cadre, and extensively he has worked in the mountains and with vast experience with the Terry University in various capacities, also as a vice chancellor and with the IUCN for a very long period of time. I think we can have his remarks also based on his experience, and you can see the future in what way he is looking for the new normals in the tourism.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Vivek.
Welcome, Dr. Singh. Yeah.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you, Vivek. First of all, welcome to this very eminent panel, and very nice to see Mandip after so many years. At least I can see him on the image. I'd like to start by saying that what Anirban said in terms of visiting these hill stations 40 years back, it reminds me when I went to Valley of Flowers, I think it was 38 years back. And then I went to Valley of Flowers about, let's say, 5-6 years back. And I totally agree with Anirban. The problem is that even 38 years back, there was discussion on responsible tourism, waste management, and everything. And even after so many years, the same discussion follows. And what I see as a problem now is that with this COVID issues, with the reduction in international travel, at least for the foreseeable future, there is going to be a lot of pressure, which Mandip has alluded to. And while it is the right moment to essentially think of how responsible tourism can be actually put into practice, the fear is how much of that will actually be implemented. And actually, I'm very happy to know that the Ministry of Tourism is keen to follow through and prepare those guidelines. But the issue is how soon can we move and how quickly can we move to make sure that these guidelines are put in place and the people start to recognize the fact that just by going and creating more problem, it doesn't help. On the other side, if you look at natural tourism, we are talking of social distancing these days. I mean, natural places allow you that opportunity to actually practice social distancing. It also is very useful for health, and the impact on health is very, very good if you are with nature. But how do we marry all these together is something which we would need to consider. But thank you very much for all the panel for joining in this session.
Thank you, TP, very much. Mandip, coming back to you and taking off from where TP has left, with regard to the MOT guidelines, how soon can we move on it, and how soon can we get the operators to comply with these guidelines? Mandip, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to wave back to TP and say nice to see him and his colleague from Thailand and so on, which is wonderful that you're supporting us. And yes, that idea of closing the national parks for a couple of months, I think in India we've got a natural closure cycle during the monsoon, but I don't know if we need to look at something way beyond that. Maybe that's not going to be an easy pill for the industry to take in, but if we look at the greater suggestions that have been made of actually increasing the amount of area in natural areas for visitation, provided it's done properly, it may still be a win-win. So there are actually, I share the angst with Anirban, and believe me, I've been a climber and explorer my whole life, and much like you, my first visitation to the Manalis and Shimlas and the hill stations of our world was precisely in that time. So whilst I share that angst, for a very long time, we've been chipping away at various levels in tourism, in different pockets and so on. And it's only about the last 10 years that the government and the industry decided that we needed to have a national umbrella body that is focusing the attention of our tourism industry, not just to profit, but also to environment and best practices. And that's how we believe that maybe there's still a silver lining. Maybe it's still not too late to reverse some of these things, because, as you saw now, with a few months of a lockdown, how nature really, really comes back into its own. So I think the strategies could be to reduce our footprint. And if we work towards that, I'm pretty sure, reasonably optimistic that we could still capture the sort of Frankenstein that we might have created. And to that extent, Ministry of Tourism, as far as yesterday's conversation, and I had a conversation this morning, they are saying, you give it to us ASAP. I've had a chat with some travel magazines where they are going to do their bit in sensitizing travelers and how destinations need to be kept in place. And the other great thing that has happened, which we have not been able to implement right now, but it is on the anvil. We've done a pilot study. So there is something called the Global Sustainable Tourism Criteria. Based on that, for the accommodation and the tour operator section, we have made the Sustainable Tourism Criteria of India, which has been approved by the Government of India. And we are now hoping to open it out to industry to do self-certification, which is certification by a third party. So once you're a sustainable, certified, STCI compliant operator, be it as a tour operator or as I think that's a good step forward also. Now, the only problem is it's voluntary, so we may not be able to go. But again, if you're a responsible traveler, our very first point is when you look for a holiday, please look for a sustainable operator, a sustainable hotel or lodge to stay in. Look for their credentials, look for their eco policy, and look for their little, international recognitions or certification, whatever it is. So maybe, and critics can always turn around and say, look, I want to go for a holiday. I'm not going to do a bloody research here and, waste my time. But I think that's a small slice of people who might be critical to anything in life. But innately, if we believe that people are responsible, chances are that this will make music with them and we can all, tango.
Yeah, thank you, Mandip. Sustainability is certainly a two-way street. Anirban, your thoughts, please.
Yes, I was listening carefully to Mandip, and it's delightful to hear about steps that are being taken to keep our tourist places pristine. All I would say is that while steps need to be taken both by the tourists and by tourism operators, sometimes the sum of the parts doesn't result in a better whole. And by that I mean creating a sustainable ecosystem which all of us contribute to. Let me take an analogy. In rural development, we are taught about the principles of participatory rural development, of engaging the people whose benefit we are really seeking in the conversation about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done and so on. So I was thinking that in this scenario where tourist places must be empty now, or devoid of tourists really, but there are all the various operators, the hotels, the shops, and the various other parts of the ecosystem that stay there who are still there. It may be a great time to have a conversation on what do we want our place to be like in the future and how do we want it to open up. Let's say we were to have a program called Kasauli Forever, and this is just a random choice. And we get people of Kasauli, the parts of the tourist ecosystem there, to have a conversation on, hey, how do we welcome tourists when they come back so that 10 years from now, Kasauli is at least as beautiful as it is now. Let's forget about what it was 10 years ago, but at least as beautiful as it is now. What do we do? How do we manage this in a way in which this can become possible? Because try as we might, however many guidelines we make, when the rubber hits the road, we usually go wrong because the locals there may because of livelihood reasons, not be open to observing the guidelines as much as we would want them to. And it is not, I mean, I'm not casting any blame on them. We know the lockdown will be released, we will go out, and we will see people without masks and people not keeping social distancing. So this is normal human nature. So, however, we have an opportunity now, if we can trigger some conversations, either in a Kasauli or a Darjeeling or a Shimla, as to how do we welcome tourists back so that the place remains at least as beautiful as it is now. Maybe we'll do some wonderful things. Maybe we'll end up implementing some of the things that Mandip once implemented and is having difficulty getting them done. And well, I suppose we would have made some tangible contribution there.
Yeah, thank you, Anirban. And
Don't forget, I must volunteer that if there is a Club Mahindra resort anywhere in that location, they will be happy to participate in conversations and actions of this kind.
Yeah, Mandip, one more. Yeah, as Anirban, in your list of people to whom you want to include, I think some community leaders and some local stakeholders must also participate because they have an equal part and they want a pie of the apple as well. So I think it would be wonderful to have them, them on board as well. Mandip, and then Mrs. Saxena.
Okay,
Mandip, this is a rejoinder. Yeah.
Yeah, just a rejoinder to that. So yeah. I think sometimes when we have these wonderful, ideas and the wish kind of list, you need to find a mechanism to make all this happen, right? So I would straight away invite you as an organization to please join hands with your passion to the Responsible Tourism Society, because to the best of our knowledge, we seem to be the one that is guiding this forward. So we are really looking for a lot of the hotels and the tour operators to join in, and possibly organizations like the IUCN, like WWF. Incidentally, the head of WWF is our founding member, Ravi Singh, who some of you might know. And again, the aspect that you touched upon, which is so vital about the local communities, it is very much part and parcel of our draft ecotourism policy, where when we are doing ideas like conservancies or ideas like promoting ecotourism, they are very much part and parcel of the stakeholder. And it is also an option where they can be an independent entrepreneur if they want to run homestays and so on. So that's all very well laid out. And I want to say, here is a booklet. This is the 4th edition of the Environment and Ecotourism Handbook, in which we've actually got 40 NGOs that we've actually farmed out to the knowledge base of people to join with, so that the local communities, when people are visiting those areas, they benefit. So that's very much at the heart of our ecotourism ideas, you know. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mandip. That's really a viable approach. Mr. Saxena, your contribution to this conversation, please. You're not audible.
Yeah. Audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And when we are talking about, you can say, some viability of the tourism, and at the same time sustainability of the tourism. So
Bolo.
in any, we talk a lot about, you can say that certainly we are talking about in the national parks, this should be the policy changes, and these type of, you can say, closing of that, just like in the Thailand, they have closed the national parks for the 2 months during the year. In India already during the monsoon, something that being practiced, and with the ecotourism, a draft policy and all these things are, and these all good things we keep on talking during this, you can say, COVID crisis. But at the same time, we have to ensure that, as per the Mandip's motto now, the responsible tourism. So whatever is there is in the policy, but in the practice, really the various linkages in the tourism, you can say, value chain, right from the tour operator and right from the, you can say, the end user, the consumer, the property owners, they all have to integrate some sort of a, you can say, tourism related ecological ethics also, so that in the entire process, it should not be like that just to, in the name of, you can say, the tourism, the main motto remains the, you can say, the more and more profitability. That particular peak period, you get more tourists, so you try your best to absorb them. But at the same time, you also have to cater to, you can say, think of the affordable tourism. It should not be like that in the name of, you can say, the sustainability of the tourism, and when we make of this type of restrictions and you suddenly increase, you can say, the cost of the tourism also, so that it becomes, you can say, unaffordable. Because ultimately you have to ensure sustainability of the nature ecosystem services only when large sections of our society, they are connected with the nature. Only then they will respect the nature. And the best way to respect the nature is to expose them, to connect them with the nature, and that role of the, you can say, the tourism comes into play. So in this all conversation, when we talk of the policy and the practice, and really some way in this new, you can say, new normal, we should also think that tourism should also be affordable while we talk of the sustainability.
Yep.
Anyone wants to respond to this? So can I take some questions, gentlemen? Yeah, TP. I want to bring in TP at this point. TP, your contribution. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to basically say what Vivek has just said. You see, one of the issues which some of our tourist places are facing are also linked to the way construction activities are carried out in these areas. If you go to the hill stations, for instance, if you go to Bhutan, now in Thimphu, at least they've made sure that the buildings follow a certain norm, a certain pattern, a certain design. But unfortunately, in our hilly areas, people construct their buildings in whatever way they want to. So if that could also be brought into these guidelines for these areas, national parks are not a problem because there are rules and regulations. That's not an issue. But if you go to other tourist areas, that's one problem. The other thing which I wanted to say was that, you see, we have to connect more people to natural areas for them to start getting interested in nature and protecting nature. And for that to happen, either we have to open up larger areas, more areas for tourism activities, and not confined to what we know at the moment, for instance, or to come up with certain schemes or other mechanisms where we can bring in, let's say, virtual tourism. I've been seeing many safaris in Africa, for instance. They are now conducting virtual tours, and I have attended. Actually, I've seen, and they are very interesting. I mean, you are not there, of course, but you are seeing what the person who's driving the jeep or the vehicle is seeing. So, is that the way forward in terms of bringing more people in touch with tourism-related activities?
TP Singh, are you suggesting augmented reality?
Why not?
Almost to that effect, yeah. Almost to that effect. Mandip, you'd like to take on Mr. Singh, like to respond?
If I can be a little cheeky and say, if TP was to promote that idea, I would come and virtually kill him. You know? But
okay, it's on record now.
You know, I think, TP, what you've been seeing in Africa, and so have we, and we've been enjoying it, it is actually a way to fuel the innate desire of people to finally travel to a destination and see it for real. You know, augmented reality and the VR sets, I've experienced it myself at some of these tourism fairs. It goes to a point, not beyond. But I totally take your point about the hill construction. We are seized with the matter. It is, in fact, Bhutan is often quoted as a great example, and it is not just in Thimphu, but it is across the country that they have that beautiful vernacular architecture. In fact, I was not the most popular person in one of my tourism forums when I suggested to the government and to our industry friends that even if you look at the way our airports have developed, they are the most boring looking cookie cutter airports, glass and plastic, all over the country. When you land in, say, Vizag or Cochin or wherever, you don't get to feel which airport you're in. Sorry, Cochin may not be a great example because Cochin actually the architecture is not bad. But I've been to Dehradun, I've been, and every airport looks the same. And that's again at the heart, as you were talking about, of what ecotourism is all about. You need the sense of place. So that's something we are now trying to suggest to governments that, for heaven's sakes, and TP, you mentioned you're from Uttarakhand. 2 years ago, I was in a conversation at the Uttarakhand investors meet, when they were trying to attract investment. And what we were saying is that, look, before you get these big money bags into your state, at least give a document and get some landscape architects, get some conservation architects on your board so they can advise them that we don't want this urban crawl to get into the village areas or the rural areas, because you are actually losing your vernacular architecture. So it's again a big angst, and like Anirban, I think all of us who go to the hill stations and we see the negatives of tourism, which have been enormous, that we are just saying that, look, guys, either we can continue, to feel really bad and sorry about it, or we try a little to do something about it. So I think our expression of the society is to try and see if we can put, hopefully not a band-aid, but to do a little bit of a surgery to the way we think and the way we transact tourism. Thanks.
Yeah, Mandip, is there a moratorium on building new construction, etc., around fragile ecosystems like national parks, sanctuaries? Mr. Saxena, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, certainly. If you see, as we talk of the policy that in India around the, you can say, national parks and the sanctuary, there is a mandatory, you can say, delineation of the eco-sensitive zone. So as per the National Board for Wildlife made a recommendation initially that around the 10 kilometers area around the national parks and the sanctuary should be notified as eco-sensitive zone. And within those eco-sensitive zone, there are, you can say, prohibited activities and the regulated activities with the primary objective of having, you can say, species conservation, so that because whenever you abruptly, you can say, at the boundary of the national park or sanctuary that terminates, because surrounding zone of influence has a very important role in overall, you can say, ecosystem services or the ecosystem health of park and sanctuary. Subsequently, it was finalized that the eco-sensitive zones have to be site-specific. So based on then, now India have, you can say, now more than, you can say, if you take national parks and the sanctuary, that total numbers is now around more than nearly 700 plus. So that out of that process, number of eco-sensitive zones have been finally notified. Some are in the draft stages of the notification. Now the real challenge is, once you notify this eco-sensitive zone, that whatever are, you can say, the as per the notification, you have a regulated or prohibited activities, and you have to prepare a master plan. The policy framework for within those ecosystem zone, how to monitor whether whatever you have stipulated for in terms of, you can say, the biodiversity conservation, in terms of, you can say, the species conservation, so that the activities which are permitted within the eco-sensitive zones, they don't adversely affect it. So these are some of the, you can say, the policy level initiatives, and further, you can say, the framework also, they are being determined. But need of the hour is just whatever we notify or whatever policy we make, how to ensure that they are monitored as a responsible, you can say, stakeholder in the surrounding area, maybe the village community, maybe the various, you can say, businesses, houses. When they undertake those businesses, now they also need to realize that business, for sustainability of the business, they have to integrate the, you can say, biodiversity conservation concerns in their business practices, because such type of, you can say, zoonotic outbreak, or which has in some way or other the origin in somewhere, you can say, in the habitat destruction or habitat degradation. So you have to respect for the nature, and certainly through the around the national parks and the sanctuary, which are very good repositories of the very rich biodiversity, and the surrounding areas within that such national parks and sanctuaries, they are also very rich in biodiversity. So those activities should be taken in such a manner so that it can be, you can say, win-win situation. You take your activities, but at the same time you care for the nature, so that ecosystem services can be sustainable, and we also live in harmony with the nature.
Anirban, if you don't have a rejoinder, can I go on to some questions, please? Do you have a rejoinder, Anirban? You want to make a
there
point?
is something I'd like to mention.
Go ahead.
I understand there is a very large event on June 15th by an organization called Business for Nature. Would IUCN by some chance be a part of that event?
Mr. Saxena?
Would you know?
Yeah, can you just repeat it? Yeah, can you just repeat it?
The organization is called Business for Nature.
Yeah.
It's a international webinar. It's on June the 15th. If you're not familiar with it, Vivek, I will send you details. There's a lot of work going on in engaging business with nature, and I'm sure you will find it useful.
Sure. Yeah, I saw somewhere, but please share the link with me, and so that we can connect, and we would be happy to be part of that.
Yeah, Mr. Saxena, there's a question for you from AK Srivastava, which says draft ecotourism policy was circulated by MOEFCC India 2 years ago. It is high time IUCN pursues with the ministry for issue of the finalized policy. Mandip, you can jump in as well. This is more relevant in the context of conservation challenges post-COVID-19 pandemic. Any responses to this?
I can
the
go
draft
after
ecotourism policy. Mandip?
You want me to go after Vivek, or should I? Whatever.
Yeah, Mandip, you please proceed.
Mandip, go.
Well, I mean, as far as we know, the latest is that this thing, this response was being done by CII, as I mentioned earlier, along with our society and TOFT. And literally a week ago or thereabouts, we got a note from the ministry that they wanted to have a Zoom conference with all the stakeholders and the ministry officials. But then I think we put up a few suggestions and a few things that we didn't really agree with, that we wanted them to further fine-tune certain things so everything is more of a balance and harmony. So possibly they are taking, I hope, not more than a couple of weeks before we can engage, and then they should be able to wrap it up. So that's what I hope is the time frame. because if we can sort that out in the next 2 to 4 weeks, I think we are in a good timetable, because national parks will now start, closing down. As it is, there's no, visitation. But then when they open, hopefully in October, then we are at least ready with some new guidelines and new thoughts for the natural areas.
All right, Mr. Saxena, they want the IUCN to pursue this as well. Can't hear you.
Okay. So sorry, I am muted. So certainly IUCN would to pursue it further, because Mr. Srivastava's organization is also one of the IUCN member in India. So, and as a IUCN, as a membership network, we can certainly pursue it, and we can, I will have a comments of our members also. I think it is already in the discussion stage, and the comments have been invited. Mr. Mandip is quite aware of it, and certainly if there are some policy gaps at this stage, now the COVID situation also strengthens that some of the gaps which we can identify because of the realization of the, or you can say developing of the new normals during the COVID times. So that we can take it further, and certainly we can as a take up with the ministry to pursue it further as a ecotourism policy.
All right. So there is a question for Anirban. Mr. Ujjwal says, considering that travel, blogging and Instagram are huge travel influences, are you looking at getting travel bloggers, influencers on board for the responsible traveler campaign?
Easy answer. Drop me a line. We'll see if we can help you. We are quite happy to have the right people talking about tourism.
Perfect. I hope you've got your answers. So there's another question which there's someone called Yoga Brata says, the general perception with the local community here in rural areas is that foreigners are carriers of the virus. How to get away from the stigma, as they may not welcome foreign guests to their villages like before? Anyone, whoever. Some thought.
Let alone foreigners. I happened to be in Ashtamudi about 7 or 8 days before the lockdown started, and a part of that trip on that lake was a visit to a village. The villagers didn't let me in. I was no foreigner. So I understand the special sensibilities about foreigners, but right now I think many villagers don't let anybody in.
Yeah, pre-COVID.
Just a week before. Just a week before the lockdown. So in Kerala was anyway ahead of the curve. So I guess they were taking precautions already.
Yeah. Well, I guess it'll take it. Yeah. I think it'll take time, obviously, and when the international traveler comes in with the due protocols of a COVID-free certificate or a vaccination that is done, that's when I think people will start to realize that they have nothing to fear. So it's obviously going to take a little while.
There's Mr. Karan is actually asking something called, on the ground, in spite of construction restrictions around national parks, Mr. Saxena, you can also, we see that there are more lodges springing every year in Kanha, Bandhavgarh, etc. Some lodges are even given permission for over 10 to 20 rooms in less than 10 acres. Please, can you share light on this and help to find better sustainable ways? Okay, so my question here is, who is belling the cat here? My question to all of you is, who is belling the cat for these illegal, unwarranted construction, gentlemen? Can I have some answers?
Yes, of course you can.
Who wants to go?
This is why Mandip and I were talking about getting the locals in. These are not things that can be mandated. These are local decisions. The local administration, the local people, you've got to get them discussing this and saying, okay, we will do this or we will not do this. There is no other way to handle this problem. Not that I can.
Lima, my response to that, again, if we look at the draft eco policy, and I'll tell you when about 10 or 12 years ago, when the Ministry of Tourism for the first time did a like kind of a mapping activity or a carrying capacity activity in one of our honorary members now, who was the previous tourism secretary by the name of Sujit Banerjee, and he now heads an organization called the World Travel and Tourism Council. They found that the bed nights available in Corbett National Parks were 5,000 bed nights, and the amount of people that can go into Corbett is more like 700 or 800 per day. So there was a crazy, gap, and we asked for a land use policy or a because obviously you've got to do something around national parks. Then you've got to have a policy on the future national parks and sanctuaries that are going to become popular, because one of the reasons or one of the strategies we are using to be a responsible part of the industry is not to keep promoting the same old national parks and sanctuaries. It is to go further afield and discover the magic of the forest, which is all over the country, and that way you will have a dispersal, and that way you will have lodges coming up in many beautiful parts of the world, or the country. But until that time, obviously you've got a mini Frankenstein which you've already created. You've got to deal with it, and you've got to come up with some regulations which are best practices, and then you've got to think of the future, because unfortunately it is precisely because of the absence of these regulations that you allowed all this to happen. So it is a sad scenario, but like I said, for every sad situation, the fact that we are now wanting to do something hopefully means that we can chip away at the problem.
There is a silver light.
Mr. Saxena.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Saxena, you want to add? You have half a minute.
Okay.
I want to take a few more questions.
Yeah. You can say the carrying capacity is the key for designing any tourism related framework, and the follow that you can say carrying capacity, all the nearby construction and the tourism framework should be based on the proper analysis and ensuring that as per the carrying capacity only the such type of facilities are permitted.
Tall order. However, let's hope something can be done. There's one more question from Anish Anderia. As you know Anish Anderia, all of us. He's the CEO of Wildlife Conservation Trust. He says, this is specifically Mandip to you. To increase opportunities for local communities, of course, Anirban too, we will have change policies so that communities can be trained and eventually run tourism operations, at least in community reserve, conservation reserves, or even in reserve forests. The whole of Northeast is largely community owned. Why haven't we seen a battery of successful, sustainable tourism models from there in the past 45 years? We need to take massive strides beyond the obvious, as the ecotourism narrative hasn't changed despite decades of failures. We need to revamp things. What do speakers have to say about this? Question is to all. Would you like to respond? Who wants to go? One by one. Mandip?
All right.
Or Anirban? TP, you are part of the panel too. Please say something.
I mean, obviously, this is, the same thing that Anirban said earlier and TP alluded to. We know that there have been massive, mess ups in the past, and we know how we as a people operate. So it's a unfortunately, and I can't tell you the amount of angst that we all go through, privately, about when we see that even common sense is disregarded and all sorts of nonsense goes on. But then at some level, I don't see any other strategy apart from just keeping your shoulder at it. It might take us another bloody 45 years, but I don't care. I'm not willing to put my foot off the pedal. And like me, there are many, many wonderfully committed, ecotourism or good, sensible Indian citizens. I would love to hear from him if he has any other strategy, any other idea that we can take on board, and I'd love to push it forward.
Yeah, I will
So
tell
there
you,
is a
hearing to
silver
this, we will
lining.
probably get back to you. Anirban, go ahead.
There is a silver lining. I can understand Anish's angst, but you know, that angst kind of spreads everywhere. We don't seem to learn from people who've done things well. And I don't have to give you examples from even this COVID crisis, where people who are not doing well are not necessarily learning from the people who are doing well. But the silver lining that we have is that India is on a massive urbanization spree. It is projected that in another 30 years, 2 or 3 times the number of people who live in urban areas today will be living in urban areas by 2050, which means that every urban area of ours is going to become much larger than it is today, including places in the hills like Shimla and Darjeeling and Kasauli and Srinagar and every other place. So if we don't like what's happened to them in the last 40 years, you can imagine what you and I will be feeling 40 years from now if business as usual continues. So here is a wild suggestion, and I don't know how we can put it in place. I've discussed this and said this in any relevant forum that I've been a part of, any urban development forum that I've been a part of, where if we say that, okay, it's all right, we've done what we had to do, and we know that this town of ours is going to be twice the size that it is today. What if we put some sort of a Lakshman Rekha around our town today and say existing policies will remain within this Lakshman Rekha, and outside this Lakshman Rekha, which we will anyway cross in a few years' time from now, we will use the best knowledge and the best practice and the best intentions and desires that we have to create a community that is sustainable, that is responsible, and that will encourage eco-urbanization or eco-tourism or eco-whatever you wish to call it. We have that opportunity today. In another 10 years, it will go away. Maybe in another 5, it will go away. So it's not something restricted to hill stations and tourist places. It is as relevant to urban development as any other place. But it is something we can do because it's something that's, the spread is inevitable. How the spread will happen is not yet inevitable. So there's a possibility of influencing that.
On the same note, there's another question which says sustainability of ecotourism model is very crucial and a difficult task. It is seen after 2 to 3 years of intervention, projects by NGOs, CSO, the local community is still not able to manage. How can we collaboratively work on sustainability of the model? TP, would you like to, it is on the same vein as sustainability, local communities, and how do we manage it? TP, your thoughts?
Look,
would you like to share something?
Yeah, look, what we are discussing is absolutely fine, and people are coming with very good ideas. The whole issue is the implementation. And that is what I think the panel is also trying to address. How do we make sure that there is a collaborative action? And I think Mandip has also said, talked about this collaboration. Now, look, I have no answer to this because this has to be done on the ground. I mean, it is as simple as that. For instance, going back to this issue of airports, you are absolutely right. When you land at Aro, you know that you landed in Bhutan. But when you land in Delhi or when you land in Dehradun, you don't leave. You could be anywhere. You could be anywhere. So it's just a question of partly mindset, which has to change, and partly maybe stricter enforcement of rules and regulations. But if since I have this this opportunity to speak now, I would like to add to what has already been said in terms of opening up more spaces for tourists to go. If you, for instance, travel from Bangkok to Hua Hin, or to under Khao National Park, for instance. On the way, you can stop after any 10 to 15 kilometers and you can enjoy a little bit of nature and you can have a place to stay. And unfortunately, that is something which we lack. We start driving from Delhi and then stop at Corbett National Park. You know, there is nothing on the way which would help in terms of dispersing the tourists.
So there's
other than a few dhabas, that is.
You know, thanks to the Border Road Organization, there's a lot of road building that's happening up in the hills. I remember a drive through Himachal about 10 years ago when we had to drive in riverbeds and over rocks and stones. 5 years ago, the roads were already being made, and small towns like Tabo and various monasteries were far more easily accessible than before. The time it took me to get to Chandratal from Manali was probably 40% of the time 5 years ago compared to 10 years ago. So I understand what TP is saying about dispersing, you know, giving tourists more places to go to, so many of them don't land up at the same place. In some places I see this happening, but obviously there's a lot more to it.
Mr. Saxena, Sambit, your thoughts, if you have any to share? Before I ask Ms. Aban to, that's fine. Okay, can I request Ms. Aban for your closing remarks?
Thank you very much, Lima.
Aban?
This has really been very interesting, and I think one has touched on a wide array of possibilities. But going back to what TP said, you know, what would be useful is to have a set of recommendations that come out from the institutions, which you can all agree upon. In terms of, you know, post-COVID, what should ecotourism look like? I mean, one of the things that came up when I spoke earlier was shutting the parks for 2 months. Now, I know that in India you do that, but there's a dimension that has been added, which in Thailand, they've decided they will close the parks depending on the breeding season of the species that are most important to those parks. So by finessing it a little bit, you're actually doing more than just giving nature a chance to recover. You're also looking at reproductive cycles of species that require the protection at times when they're most vulnerable. So that kind of finessing is possibly something that needs to be brought in. The second point, of course, is that India has so many wonderful tourist sites that have been done with sensitivity, sustainability, a respect for culture, and ensuring that, you know, communities benefit. And if these could be held up as examples, you know, to the rest of the country in terms of the right way of doing things, that I think would also be, you know, the best way, you know, to ensure that people aspire to the same kind of model. Not just by saying that this resort deserves a prize, but what is it within that resort that makes it deserve a prize? What is it about its sustainability? What is it about its methods? What is it done in terms of conservation that puts it in that category? And the point TP was making, you know, that in some countries, the tourism is not just from one destination to another. There are multiple destinations along the roads. Another country that does this very well is Sri Lanka, where you've got tourism that's really embedded into almost everything they do. And so many sites everywhere. You can stop at a beach, you can stop in a forest, you can stop in a tea plantation, and some more of that thinking, because India has plenty of opportunities. Every single ecosystem can offer that. It's a case of shifting to look at multiple places, multiple sites, which have different categories of tourism, but all of which ensure that there isn't this concentration of people in just one or two places, which is, of course, the carrying capacity argument that was brought up earlier. And, you know, we'd very much like to continue to work with Club Mahindra and to work with any other tourism, ecotourism sites because we have in IUCN the privilege of working with many countries and seeing how it's done very well in many countries. And we know India has great examples as well. So, it's just a question of making sure that we can be part of that partnership and ensure greater success. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aban. And to my panelists, and just to wrap things, thank you so much for being here. Just as Anish said, my heart also lies in the community-run tourism projects and community-led viable approaches, where we can reduce the negative impacts of unplanned tourism. Because tourism has a great social economic impact, it has cultural impact, it has environmental impact, and taking into account all of this, can we not, hit the ground running with regards to the MOE of CC, the Ministry of Tourism policies and everything. So thank you so much, Anirban. Thank you, Mandip. I know you have loads and loads of work on your hands, but it'll be wonderful to, bring together everything under an umbrella, and maybe out of this conversation, have an IUCN partner with you, and have IUCN and MOCC on full partnership with all of you. If you need Mr. Saxena as here, you'd like to comment on this, Mr. Saxena? How do you want to take this forward?
Yeah, certainly we would like to take it forward, and during this COVID time, certainly this webinar also gave us an opportunity to have, thoughtful discussion in which some very relevant issues and challenges which we have deliberated, and IUCN in India, especially with the with the network of our having about 40 institutional members and more than 800 commission members. I think with this network we should take advantage of this, and so that how the conservation issues can be integrated while designing any ecotourism related framework, or policy related issues. So IUCN as a voice, with all the support of all the members, can play certainly a very important role in influencing and assisting the society, so that every citizen has a right to visit the natural places, to right to tourism, but at the same time should be the do's and don'ts, and how to have harmony with the nature, how to design such type of sustainable practices, how to have in the new ecotourism draft policy some of the gaps which now we are realizing, to incorporate that at this stage, even more and more suggestions. And even if the policy is in there, but the thing is that the practice, how to ensure that when the practices of the tourism, they are sustainable, they take care of the nature. At the same time, another very relevant issue which came up, that the carrying capacity, because based on the carrying capacity only the surrounding infrastructure and other things, they should be allowed. So such type of regulations, and certainly the regulations with certainty and ensuring that these regulations are implemented, that is key to a win-win situation when we have sustainability of the tourism, especially the livelihoods which are generated through the tourism activities. They can be sustainable only if the tourism is sustainable. So these are some of the few learnings, and certainly I would like to thank each and everyone and today's webinar with such a good response, and we will have a series of webinars next. In this series we will have on 29th, so that invite will go to everyone, and I think you can also spread the word, so that once we come out with all these series, then some sort of good documentation and all based on this webinar series, that can also be web out. And for the Mahindra group also, I am thankful to Mr. Ghosh that he has really given very good insight, and how since his various properties and all, they can now have to respond to ensure the sustainability of the tourism in the future, and how to develop the new normals. So these are the issues, and in any way, if IUCN can be of any assistance, our network organization, we are here, and especially Mr. Mandip, I know him since my Haryana days also, and we had a number of meetings. We also consulted him for the tourism in the Aravallis areas and all, and he gave very good suggestions. And certainly with his experience and with all the at the policy level, at the, you can say, implementation level, the various, you can say, tourist facilities providers, they all have to come at a common platform to make, you can say, whatever we have deliberated today, to make this into a reality.
Yeah, Mandip, go ahead.
Can I just come in? I want to thank Mr. Ban, TB, for some great gems, and yourself, and thank you for putting it together. My call to action, Vivek, is going to be, we are in the process, as we speak, of creating MOUs with some very key and like-minded organizations. We have another MOU with the Ministry of Tourism. We are reaching out to the UNEP, to the WWF, and we would love to have one with you. So let's do a synergy and an institutional kind of a mechanism which allows us to engage much more. And, you know, I absolutely love the idea of working more collaboratively, and possibly what, you know, Anirban's been mentioning, that we all really need to come under a collective umbrella before we can take the next few steps and use this opportunity to, you know, make sure that we really keep a sensitive footprint on our planet. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mandip, thank you so much, everybody.
More collaboration.
We should take this offline.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. If we wish
thank you, TP and Aban. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, TP sir. Thank you.
Thank you.